Everyone, welcome to today's webinar, A Guide to Entering the UK Market. My name is Julie Crosdale, I'm an Associate of Competitive Advantage and I'm chairing today's event. The webinar will look at the aspects that overseas construction product manufacturers need to consider and evaluate when looking to sell into this market. The webinar will last around 45 minutes. Everyone on the call is on mute. However, should you have a question or feedback, please do pop it in the chat box and we will address these at the end. Today, we have two speakers on the panel, Chris Ashworth from Competitive Advantage and Robert Hunt from Conduit Limited. Firstly, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon. So my name is Chris Ashworth. I'm founder of Competitive Advantage, and my experience is half my career was working with product manufacturers, which included developing a number of overseas markets. In the last 20 years, as I say, I founded Competitive Advantage, which conducts market research, undertakes training and delivers consultancy to assist companies in implementing various programs. Our expertise is around construction products and particularly the specification process. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Chris. My name's Robert Hunt. I'm an associate at Conduit, who are market entry specialists providing market entry and early stage growth support to overseas companies wishing to enter the UK market. My background is that I have for substantially most of my commercial life been in the construction industry, building products and construction plant. And for the last 25 years have specialized in supporting overseas companies establish a bridgehead in the UK, either as their own operation or in which case we support them to set up and populate their own businesses, or to find sales and marketing partners to allow them to scale their business remotely from Europe or elsewhere into the UK.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
I think, Chris, you're going to share the slides. Brilliant, I can see those.
Thank you, Julie. So I'll get underway. And I'll start by talking about the UK construction market. This chart shows how it's trended over the last 25 years. It includes the forecast, the latest forecasts for construction activity. The market performed quite strongly during the COVID lockdown and came out of it in quite a buoyant mood. However, the impact of various influences such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the consequent high energy prices, and a number of political changes in the last 12 months within the UK government have meant that it's stumbled a bit, and expectations are that it will fall slightly during 2023 and then start to make a recovery. However, this is primarily influenced by the housing sector. Now, if we just look at the different sectors working from the bottom up, the dark blue there represents public housing, and you'll see that's a relatively small element of the total construction market, and it's continuing a reasonable trend. It's expected to actually show some growth in 2023, but only bringing it back to pre-COVID levels. Where the majority of the effect of the construction activity fall in 2023 is accounted for is with the private housing sector, which is expected to fall quite significantly this year. However, again, there is an element of uncertainty as to exactly how badly the market will perform and when it will start to make its recovery. Our forecasters, Hughes and Associates, expect the market to fall this year, fall a little bit more next year, and then start to recover after that. And that's going to be driven partly by the cost of mortgages and borrowing, and partly by confidence of the people who are going to be investing in properties. Next level up is infrastructure. And in 2023, there is expected to be a continuation of the significant growth we've seen in recent years. This is down to major projects like the HS2 rail project, but also work to improve the broadband network, the laying in of charging facilities for electric vehicles, and a number of other projects then linked to roads and water and sewage. The market then falls to lower levels, but again, it's relative and it's much higher than it was in previous years. So I think infrastructure can be considered a good opportunity. Public non-housing, which includes education, healthcare, a variety of other forms of that nature, it's expected to show some growth in 2023 as it again tries to move up. And this is down to the investment from government in the education and healthcare sectors in particular, but also investment in other areas such as the military. Next up is private industrial, and again, this has performed quite well in the last couple of years. It includes logistics warehouses in particular, and as we see a change away from traditional retail to far more purchasing online, there's been an investment in these warehouses. That money is going to start to slow as the projects come to fulfillment, but there's still quite a lot going on in that sector. Private commercial is one where we will see further investment. There's quite a turbulent situation there. We've got the retail and hospitality sectors who've been struggling somewhat in the last couple of years as a change of behaviours. But with offices, we're actually seeing a situation where quite a lot are being remodeled and restructured to reflect changing in working practices. What we're seeing is a little bit of a slowing in the after 2023 as investors hold back to find out how things are going to progress in the broader economy. As far as the repair and maintenance side is concerned, it's still growing, but much more slowly. And again, this is down to a slowing down of government investment in the sector as they try to cut back on total spend. Robert.
Thank you, Chris. It seems probably a strange question to ask, but is there a market for your product in the UK, and how do you find out? And I've chosen to illustrate that with a couple of examples. The first one, which is something that is relatively common in Europe, is the so-called clay building blocks. These are used widespread throughout Europe, and taking the point from Chris's slide, if you looked at the opportunities in the UK as they appear in Europe, house building, both private and public, is one fairly large sector which should be applicable for these sorts of products. However, next slide please, Chris. The issue here is that although they are widely used throughout Europe, they are seen very much as something of a niche product here. It's not to say they can't be used and haven't been used, they have, but their use here is such that it's seen primarily as a self-build product. The self-build market is of itself quite strong and robust, and not so subject to price pressure. But it does mean that manufacturers of these types or categories of products should both manage their expectations in terms of how much return they would get from a UK market investment, as well as consider what channels and specification and distribution channels are most appropriate for what is seen as something that's slightly more specialized rather than mainstream. The other part of the question is, does that category of product that you are making and supplying exist in the UK? And again, that may seem a strange question, but there are categories that exist, let's say, for example, in Europe and elsewhere, that have not yet gained a foothold or been exposed to the UK market. And for this, to illustrate this, I've chosen the example of a German sheet material called Fermacell. This was introduced into the UK in around about 1995, and this category of product did not exist within the UK. It's a high-performance building board, and conventional wisdom would see it being used up against the likes of other drywall products, for example, such as plasterboard. However, given that its price point is 3 times the price of conventional drywall products, market entry and particularly early traction, which is important in any market entry strategy, had to be calibrated and changed, because taking it up against a drywall product where it's a price-dominated field meant that there was likely to be significant resistance to its market take-up. So for that reason, it was marketed very, very successfully against a different category of product, which was conventional masonry, where it had very significant opportunities and benefits in providing a masonry-like structure, i.e. solid, massive, load-bearing, and resistant to impact and so on, but with the features and benefits in terms of speed of erection that drywall gives. And by choosing that particular route of initial market, then early market traction was gained, and the product achieved a position from which you could grow eventually into the drywall sector. Back to you, Chris.
When looking at the UK market, one of the key things is the legislation that you have to meet. And I guess what really drives the whole thing are the UK building regulations. These represent a series of 17 approved documents running from document A through to document S, and they define various requirements for fire, thermal insulation, most recently to control overheating, things of this nature. So it's important to look at how your products can contribute to meeting these regulations, because they're very much the minimum standard. Within those regulations, they'll have defined certain testing criteria that need to be undertaken to demonstrate the suitability of the product to meet those requirements. And then building control are responsible for ensuring that the construction meets those requirements. So building control is about the safety overall of the building, that it is constructed correctly. Each local authority in the different counties around the country will have people who are appointed to come in and inspect a building during its different stages of construction, along with independent building control officers. So again, it's important they're aware of your product and how they meet those regulations.
Thank you, Chris. You'll be familiar with the widespread use of the CE marking or European conformity. And up until Brexit at the beginning of 2020, CE marking was the de facto means of providing proof of conformance. However, since January 2020, the new UK Conformity Assessment mark, UKCA, has been introduced and is being rolled out throughout the British economy. This applies not just to construction products, but to consumer goods and so on and so forth. It was originally proposed that the use of UKCA marking would become mandatory from the 1st of January 2023. Due to pressure from lobbying and a certain amount of inertia within the capacity of the UK accreditation service, the people, the houses that actually accredit products coming into the UK, a grace period of a further 2 years has been allowed, so that it is now going to be phased in 2025. The operative dates that you should take note of are that all deliveries that are sent into the UK must contain or must carry the UKCA mark if they are arriving or being delivered after 30th of June 2025. However, and it's a big however, this does not apply to transactions, by which I mean that if an order is placed for your goods that is to come into the UK, then if that order is placed for it on or beyond the 31st of December 2024, then it must already have the CA marking. In other words, you've got 6 months grace for the deliveries, but you have to have your product UKCA marked prior to the end of 2024. This does not, by the way, apply to Northern Ireland, which has a slightly different regime, and it's a hybrid model which will still accept CE marking. It's worth also pointing out, as the slide shows, that UKCA marking is something that is controlled by UK accreditation service bodies, and therefore you need to form some form of contact, technical contact with these bodies in order to get your products into conformance prior to the end of December 2024. Thank you, Chris.
The most recent piece of legislation to be introduced in the UK is the Building Safety Act, which became law in April 2022. However, it's only still in the process of being implemented, and that will take place during 2023 and 2024 when a variety of other pieces of secondary legislation will take place. Its main focus is on high-risk buildings as a result of the Grenfell fire tragedy of a few years ago, and it's looking at giving occupants of these buildings greater rights, but also ensuring a satisfactory quality of construction. There are a couple of key things to note from this. One is the fact that product manufacturers can be prosecuted if they make false claims or do not provide products which meet the safety requirements. And there are two activities that are taking place at the moment, which at this point are voluntary, but are aimed to provide a form of accreditation to match with the requirements of the Safety Act. One of those is the Code for Construction Product Information, which is defining processes that manufacturers should follow to ensure that the information they provide is accurate, correct, and up to date. And that includes not just the manufacturer, but those selling it, so distributors, merchants, wholesalers. The other piece of legislation or voluntary code that is being developed is the Construction Product Competence Standard, which is intended to ensure that the people advising and recommending, so that could be salespeople, marketing people, technical staff, both again with manufacturers and wholesalers and merchants, but also the architects, contractors, engineers that are involved, are suitably qualified to be able to make recommendations. So that is going to be setting out a structure of training, and it's quite complicated because of the fact that for different products, what needs to be known is quite different. So these things are coming along and are something that we need to be aware of. Robert.
Thank you, Chris. Since 2020, the original lockstep between British standards and the European norms has been discontinued. And whilst that might sound dramatic, in reality and in practice, it's less of an issue because of the, simply put, the amount of inertia in the system. So, for example, BS 476, which relates to fire, still has its EN equivalent and is still operative. But there are divergence of standards. We're seeing it more in other sectors at the moment, particularly in the food sector. But it is likely, for the reasons that Chris explained with the Grenfell Tower disaster, that local standards may be developed and may either fall behind or go ahead of what is currently available within Europe, for example. It doesn't, the use of technical approvals, TAs, is still accepted, and where no relevant BS or EN standard exists, it is seen as being still an acceptable route to market. The TAs are, again, as with the UKCA marking, are controlled by UK accreditation service bodies, and testing houses. And again, we can provide advice on those specific applications. We now move on to barriers to market entry, and both Chris and I have got a couple of examples. There are many in this particular area, and it is literally a minefield. But the one that I've chosen is that of trade associations. Trade associations exist in any geographical area. In the UK, they are prevalent within the construction industry and are there primarily, but not exclusively, to lobby for their members' interests, by which I mean that they will try and get legislation changed, amended, or whatever in such a way that it provides some benefit to their members. And they will generally do this by a number of means. Firstly is direct lobbying to Parliament to get legislation changed or enacted, or the other alternative, which is often used, is working with contractors or builders or developers to provide a particular benefit to the developer, for example, that again tries to lock down a particular type of building or site practice to limit its use to their membership. It's worth also pointing out at this juncture that the trade associations are very normally only available to UK accredited companies. In other words, if you are in Scandinavia or Europe, for example, and do not have some form of UK body, then you may not be eligible for membership of the trade associations. Next slide, please, Chris. As a good example of this, and this one is now some 12 or 13 years old, but it still holds water today, is the so-called robust details process. Now, robust details were actually introduced earlier on in the just after the millennium, and they were introduced by again trade associations. And the intention here was that following general disquiet within the public and private sector about the acoustic performance of new build housing, particularly housing, the government had proposed that every house, new build, had to be subjected to pre-completion acoustic testing. We're talking not about individual dwellings, but we're talking about so-called party walls, where you have groups of dwellings developed together, where the passage of sound between one house and another, or one flat and another, becomes objectionable. And so the government introduced this legislation to ensure this compulsory pre-completion acoustic testing, and the house builders and the trade associations lobbied to find a way around it. And the way that they did it was to essentially create a series of building details, construction details, that would allow the test to be restricted to a representative proportion of the houses rather than everything, which obviously saves a lot of time and money on site. By doing this, they strengthened the building details, but in doing so, it had two potentially negative effects for people who were outside of the association wishing to come in and buy into the UK housing market. The first one was that to a large point, you had to be a member of a trade association to gain access to it. But more importantly, because these details were approved construction details, it effectively put a barrier to innovation. So if, let's say, for example, you are outside the UK but had an innovative product that would solve, let's say in this case, an acoustic problem, then there was this barrier to entry that had been created by the fact that your product may not conform to the building and construction details that had been introduced as part of the robust standard details process. As I said, this process was started in the early part of the millennium and was finally approved by the government in 2009 and exists to this day. and it is an effective barrier to entry if you are selling products A, into the house building sector, and B, have some acoustic benefit to their use. Chris.
Back about 10 years ago, the British government were looking at ways to reduce the cost of construction for their own projects and identified the benefits of using building information modelling, or BIM, to achieve those cost savings. So they introduced a mandate that required all government buildings to be constructed or designed and constructed using BIM. So initially, the industry was a little reluctant to adopt this, but once they started to move forward and invest in the software, contractors in particular saw the benefits of using BIM. And so I think it's fair to say that the UK has been ahead of the curve in terms of adopting this method of construction, or design and construction. As a consequence, it's quite widely used today. Not so in the smaller projects where particularly one-off residential housing, but certainly in non-residential and larger residential constructions. So that means that if people's products are going to be selected, they need to have BIM objects available to them. What we've also seen is that expanding, and I've used the title digitization here because now we're seeing a much greater adoption of such things as having a code, of a barcode or QR code on building materials, so that it can be logged which product has actually been installed in the construction, and therefore subsequently the information available for anyone working on it to know what it is. So it's very, very important for manufacturers wishing to enter the UK market to be able to offer BIM objects as part of the package of information that they give to their specifiers and contractors. Which brings us on to marketing channels, and probably the most important marketing channel is the website. I'd say that UK specifiers are not anti overseas products. They're quite open to using a whole variety of different products and materials. However, what they are very concerned about and nervous about is selecting products which don't have full support. They don't want to find a situation where halfway through an installation program, the contractor can't get the information they require, or there are shortages of materials, things of this nature. So they need reassuring about that. And the website is probably the most important point for this. The website needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be easy to navigate, so an architect or an engineer can find the data they need about products, that they can download information, and by that I mean specifications, BIM objects, data sheets, various conformity documents, things of this nature. So it's very important to have a good quality website in English that one gives the specifier and also the contractor easy access to information, but also reassures them that there is full support for their product in the UK. In addition to the website, and particularly if your product is one that's not familiar to people, then the product directories are a good route to market. There are quite a few of these. I'd say probably 20 odd product directories, but of which maybe 3 or 4 are the leading ones. NBS Source, Barber Product Search are the 2 that come to mind as the most widely used by architects and engineers. And this is a route that, again, is a good way of creating awareness of your products. And what is really important is access to technical advice. As I say, the specifier wants to be confident that there will be the support for the product if they choose to use it. So as well as advice in the form of online chat facilities, probably what is really needed is telephone access to get that advice, and ideally somebody who can come to site to look at products and situations and solve problems that way. Robert.
Thank you, Chris. Anglicising your offer is not just about having your marketing documentation in English. English is probably regarded as the lingua franca, the most common language that would be used, and certainly here in the UK, because of our island status, excuse me, we've traditionally been very poor at learning foreign languages. So having good quality and English product support, whether it's firmware or websites or anything else, is an absolute first step to standing a chance of breaking into the UK market. It doesn't just come down to your English support, though. As Chris alluded, it's also quite important to have UK contact details. The UK firms, distributors or specifiers, are not afraid of foreign products, but they do expect UK support. Simple things like UK contact numbers, UK URLs ideally, or certainly UK phone numbers. And by the way, mobile numbers are quite acceptable, but they should be UK numbers. I would also say that it's important when you're considering your marketing offer that you use UK idioms, by which I mean that there's a certain amount of resistance, I'll put it no stronger than that, in the UK to the use of Americanized marketing material. It just creates a slight barrier, which two nations separated by a common language is the phrase that's often used in defining the difference between the UK and America. But it does mean that if there is a slight pushback because you have used something that you're using, say, for example, in America, and think, okay, well, it's English, job done, that it may slow your market entry. The other thing I would emphasize is the massive use within marketing of social media in the UK, whether it's traditionally or more traditionally Facebook and Twitter, depending on the nature of your product and whether it's a live product that is something that wants to interact with groups of individuals, or more obviously at first glance, LinkedIn, all of which are used widespreadly in a widespread manner throughout the whole of the UK. More recent social media such as Instagram and TikTok is gaining a significant amount of traction, and with the younger generation of specifiers and UK influencers coming in stream, it's important to consider all social media, which might not be prevalent in your country to the same extent, but it has a massive impact in the UK. Chris.
So now we come to look at the sales channels. I'm starting by, at the bottom of the page there, you'll see what is called the RIBA Plan of Works. So the RIBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects, and quite some time ago they developed their Plan of Works, which defines the stages of a construction project. This is a summary of those stages. There's a lot more information behind it, but it's also the common way that specifiers and contractors in this country tend to refer to where they've got to on the project. So you can see it goes from stage 0 through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. The design stages are really from stage 2 through stage 3, where at that point the architect is thinking about what options they might follow. At stage 4, they're looking for technical details, the full support, so they can develop the specifications for the construction of the project. Stage 5, which you'll see is called manufacturing and construction, and that's acknowledging the fact that there's a growing use of off-site manufacture as well as on-site construction in the more traditional manner. That is where obviously it transfers from design through to actually assembling the project, and where the contractor will need input in terms of using the products and where they can be obtained. And then we have stages 6, handover, and 7, use. And again, through BIM, use is now being used to monitor how products are performing and to see if they're actually delivering the performance that was expected. So We start with the specifiers, the architect and the engineer, who, as I say, will be involved from stages 2, 3 and 4 as they pull together the concept and then flesh it out, get all the details. Then they pass it on to the contractors who are responsible for constructing it. However, the contractors are also important influencers. So the specifiers may have a nominated product which they choose to use, although invariably if they do that and name a product, they also add a caveat such as or equivalent or approved, which gives the contractor the flexibility to use alternative products. But very often the specifier will use a performance specification, which leaves the final choice of product down to the contractor and subcontractor. So they are important people to influence as well. And of course, finally, we have distribution, who are responsible for getting the product to the construction site. Now, in terms of distribution, I've used that as a general term there, but we have specialist distributors who tend to focus in on a particular type of product category. Maybe it's electrical products, it might be ceilings, things of this nature, where they have a broad range of that particular type of material. They may sell direct to specialist contractors, or they may sell on to wholesalers and merchants. The wholesalers and merchants have a broader range of products. So typically they'll cover everything from site clothing through to tools, through to timber, cement, bricks, blocks, cables, and many of the things that the specialist distributors carry as well. So you've got to cover that whole network off. It's also important to make the point that the distributors, merchants and wholesalers are more order takers than they are sellers. So it's not sufficient to just get them to agree to stock your products. They're not going to actively sell the product in most cases. So you need to have another support network in place to engage with the specifiers and the contractors to create the demand pull through. And so, Robert, perhaps you want to talk about the practical aspects.
Thank you, Chris. Just picking up on Chris's last point about distribution, to an extent, the question of distribution can be influenced by your manufacturing model. If, for example, you are manufacturing to stock, in other words, it's more of a commodity product, then distribution may be a more important aspect of your strategy for the UK. And finding distributors, as Chris says, is not just about getting the product into stock, but you do, I would reinforce this point, you do need to support it. A number of overseas companies will discount distribution as an option for them if they are manufacturing to order. In other words, it's a bespoke product which ordinarily would be made specifically for a project. I would caution against adopting that as a blanket strategy, for the simple reason that distributors can provide a valuable service in terms of a line of credit, where they will understand their customers and will have checked out the fact that they are likely to get paid. Because the worst thing that you want is for your product to be made specially for a particular project, and then to deliver it to site, and then fail to get paid for it. That leads on neatly to how you find partnerships in the UK and how your routes to market are affected according to your ultimately your strategic needs and effectively the map of the UK. The first question that often is considered is whether you want a partnership or you want to do it yourself. To explain, partnerships and sales partnerships, whether they're distributors with some form of specification arm, and there are plenty of those in the UK, and they are generally more specialist, but they will take your product, they will treat it almost usually on an exclusive basis, treat it as their own, and they will put the sales support behind it, but expect a higher margin as a result. Can take your product and innovate it into the UK market. There is a downside to that in that as an overseas manufacturer, you then lose sight of the downstream channels and the people who are actually making the decisions, because universally your sales partner in the UK will consider their part of the deal to be ownership of the downstream sales channel. The pros of that type of approach are that you will get a faster market entry at the expense of some margin, but you will lose downstream customer visibility. The other way of doing it, setting up yourself, is one that is a tried and tested route. Sometimes it's considered a little bit on the difficult side because of the logistics and the administrative headaches that are required by setting up either a UK limited company or a branch of your company in the UK, and staffing it and remote management. And these are all things that we can help and advise on, and indeed support you very actively with. It's worth noting that the old pre-Brexit practice of being able to send your guys over armed with a suitcase of literature and a degree in English no longer apply, and visas are now a requirement for entering the UK to do business for any protracted length of time. There are ways around this, and you can get UK organisations to sponsor you, but it's not without difficulty, and there are some certain hurdles that you have to pass over, such as providing minimum salaries, the sponsorship organisations, and the administration that is required, that can be avoided by choosing one of the two options that we spoke about earlier in terms of finding partners or setting up your own UK establishment. And then finally, there is a very long and growing checklist of things that you have to do from a government point of view in order for you to be able to get your product into the UK. And the last time I looked, that checklist was down to 11 separate operations, including getting specific EORI numbers, EORI numbers for your organisation and the product categories. And so the administrative headache that has been imposed by our self-imposed Brexit is something that can be seen to be daunting to foreign organisations, and that is where organisations like Competitive Advantage and Conduit can provide you with a roadmap and support to guide you through some of the larger traps. Chris.
So I think we're probably at the question stage, Julie, aren't we?
We are, and I'm pleased to say we have got a couple. I think this one's aimed at you, Chris, this one. You talked about the public and private housing sectors. Can you explain the differences in more detail, please?
Right. So I think unlike many European countries where people tend to rent for long periods of time and then perhaps purchase a house later in life, the UK market is quite clearly defined as to two sectors. We have the rental sector, which is primarily low cost accommodation. So this is known as the public sector. Originally it was funded by government and local authority. It's now also got a lot of charities who are housing associations. So it's referred to as social housing. And that's where primarily most of the rental takes place. And then we have the private sector where houses are built en masse by house builders. We have about, I would say, perhaps more than a half of the whole market is produced by about 10 private organisations such as Barratt's, Persimmons, who construct houses for sale. And then the balance is made up of self-build, which Robert mentioned earlier on when he was giving an example of a product application. And also we're now seeing a privately operated build to rent sector. So Public sector housing represents social housing, housing associations, stock that's owned by local authorities, and which is generally providing affordable, I think is the term, housing that people rent. Private sector is primarily housing which is constructed to sell on to individual people.
Thanks for that clarification, Chris. And one more question. I think this is probably you, Robert, for you. How do I find out if my product is suitable for the UK before I try and sell it?
Well, there are several ways that you can do that. And again, the point that Chris was making earlier about simple research and looking through the product directories, Barber Index and so on and so forth that Chris listed is one way, and you can find your product or type of product in those directories. It's usually a good indication that the product is being marketed. However, I go back to these barriers to entry, and we've spoke extensively about BIM, and I can't emphasize BIM enough. It's something from my own personal experience, the UK is putting more effort and attention on than perhaps our European partners. But there are other areas that do have an influence, and one that's worth highlighting, I think, is, and Chris alluded to this earlier, is the building regulations and the so-called approved documents. I'll give you an example. We had a French company that we were advising some 18 months ago, and they were manufacturing in drainage products for primarily, but not exclusively, house building. And they'd done their research and said, yes, okay, the UK uses this type of housing, that type of drainage, it's plastic drainage, and we think it can be sold by probably a specification channel, which will then drive down to either the private or public sector housing markets through the contractors. And they ticked all of the boxes and thought about distribution, but really wanted to test dip their toe in the market and test whether this product would be available or would satisfy the requirements of the UK market, because it did offer several sustainable product advantages in terms of speed and insulation and removal of use of other materials. However, and it was a big however, the bit that they had missed was the specific building regulations, which in this case was so-called Part M, relating to drainage in the UK environment. And the problem for them was that because of this partly hidden requirement, and it did taking some finding within the UK building regulations, that requirement would have meant that their use would have been stopped on site by the building control officers, these regional or county-based organisations that police the building sites, because the way that the product worked and its lack of need for certain other standardised building products meant that the building control officers would have said, no, you cannot use this product. Which in turn would have made its use impossible within the UK without a long and expensive lobbying campaign. And so essentially it's not a simple means of getting into the UK. You have to do your research, but the research is not just desk-based or web-based to find out what is actually needed, what is being used, how is it getting to market. But there is also that old phrase, a little local knowledge, where an understanding of the regulations and the specialist UK standards that we've both alluded to during this presentation will help you and avoid a long and expensive delay in getting your product into the UK market. Julie.
Thank you. I think now we're going to look at what the next steps could be for a company considering entry.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Competitive Advantage have put together a UK construction market handbook, which pulls together a lot of the data in terms of the market, the decision makers, the legislation, social, economic factors. And that's available to purchase and download from our website. We also have various other reports that we've done into such things as the zero carbon market here in the UK and our construction media index, which gives information about the use of the various communications channels. So there's quite a lot of resource that's available from the website. But probably, Robert, it's about practical advice, isn't it?
It is, Chris. I think what is hopefully becoming apparent is that the UK market is quite complicated. Most markets are, but it comes down to local knowledge and an understanding of what your objectives are and what is possible is really where competitive advantage and Conduit can provide that joined up support. We would encourage you just to pick up the phone or email us or get in touch and say, look, can we help? What is the issue here? Is my product suitable for the market? How might I get it into the market? And then after that, we can together we can look at this and provide you with the sort of information that would allow you to make a strategic go, no-go decision on the UK market as a whole. And it generally, that process would start with Chris and his team in terms of market evaluation. Chris.
Yes, that's right. And what we've done for a number of companies who have decided they do want to enter the market is to conduct research that might involve, for instance, talking to architects or engineers to understand what their attitudes would be to that type of product, what information they would require to support it, looking at competitor products that are currently available, what channels to market they follow, and again, perceptions and attitudes of those products. Quite often, talking to specifiers or contractors about existing products can identify the weaknesses and therefore the opportunities for a new entrant to the market. So we can do quite comprehensive work of that nature, evaluating, looking at what products are stocked where to help inform the implementation plan to enter the UK market. And then when it comes to help with implementation, I think it splits between marketing resource and expertise that competitive advantage can provide and the services that Conduit can provide. Isn't that right, Robert?
It is, Chris. Thank you. I think this is obviously a joined up approach, and having made that go no decision to enter the UK market, depending on your sales strategy, whether it's a choice, okay, we're going to find sales partners, we're going to try this marketing channel, we're going to need these particular elements of our marketing mix, 5 Ps if you like, to successfully innovate into the UK market. We can then provide you with as much or as little support as you need in terms of that implementation, whether it's actually doing more detailed market research on the key players in a particular market, perhaps an approach to them if you're looking for sales partners with whom you'd wish to partner to allow them to develop your downstream product demand. Or indeed, whether you decide, no, we're going to do it ourselves, we want to retain control of this process, we want an understanding and a long-term view for the UK market, and therefore setting up a UK entity, whether it's a limited company or possibly a UK branch of your main trading operation, are decisions that we can guide you through. There are benefits and issues with all of these options, but we have extensive experience in this, and ultimately the decision remains yours. But making a decision in the absence of a full and comprehensive plan and the right local market knowledge is always risky. That's where both companies, both Competitive Advantage and Conduit, can help in a joined up fashion.
Well,
back to you, Julie.
Yes, thank you. I think what that leaves me to say is thank you, Chris and Robert, for your participation today. Thank you to everyone else for joining us. We hope you found the content useful. We'll be sending all attendees an email over the next day or two containing a link to this recorded webinar. As we've already said, should you wish to discuss further anything we've covered today, or you'd just like an informal chat about UK market entry in general, please do contact us. We're always happy to talk. We look forward to hearing from you and potentially working together in the future. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.